I'm Jan Holden. I'm a past president of this association and currently the editor of the Journal of Near-Death Studies. And I've been a researcher in the field of near-death studies since the mid-1980s when I was working on my doctoral dissertation. And I've researched a lot of different aspects of NDEs, and I have interest in them on a lot of different levels. I'm technically a professor of counseling at the University of North Texas, and so I am interested in counseling implications of near-death experiences. But I also am interested in the nature of the experience, the nature of after effects, and what NDEs tell us about consciousness, and the implications of NDEs for the future of humanity and the planet. So I have, as I said, interest in a lot of different levels of the phenomenon. So I think that's probably the most important stuff about me. And I'll ask the panel members to introduce themselves in the same order that they're eventually going to be talking about their ideas. And I'll actually go last in that regard. So next is Suzanne.
So, good afternoon. My name is Suzanne Mays. My husband and I, Robert, we work together in this effort to try to combine spirituality with science. My personal story is that I've had a life completely devoted to the inquiry of who we are and what is the meaning of our life and what happens to us when we die. And then to be involved in the practical applications of spiritual indications in education, for instance. Also, as a personal example, my work as a certified music practitioner, some of the spiritual principles that can be applied to playing music at the bedside for those that are ill or at the end of life. And what else should I say? I'm not used to talking about myself, but this is a field that is very close to our hearts, and we hope this is informative for everybody.
Thanks. And Mitch?
Hi, my name is Mitch Liester. I'm a psychiatrist in private practice in Monument, Colorado. I have a long-standing interest in near-death experiences dating back about 30 years. Since my grandfather had one initially is how I learned about them, and since then have been fascinated by meeting many people who've had near-death experiences and wanting to understand better what happened. My research interests in the field of near-death experiences have spanned a wide range of interests. Initially, I began looking at inner voices that occur after near-death experiences and trying to understand how those voices differ from hallucinations, which psychiatrists tend to medicate, and realizing that we don't want to medicate people who have voices after near-death experiences. And then trying to recognize, again, the difference between visions and hallucinations. Also interested in the electromagnetic changes that occur for many people following their near-death experience. We've conducted a study with questionnaires a few years ago at one of the IANDS conferences, and subsequently asking people who've had near-death experiences, do you experience changes in your electromagnetic field or in electromagnetic appliances that you use? And that information is currently with Bruce Grayson. Hopefully we'll be writing it up and publishing it in the near future. Along with some friends, Skip Morgan, who's here in the audience, and a couple of other friends too, we've also attempted a study having people who've had near-death experience who report electromagnetic changes wear watches to see if they would stop, because many people experience their watches stopping following their NDEs. Unfortunately, all the watches we sent out to people continue to run just perfectly, so we weren't able to gather any data that was helpful to us. Also interested, as I gave a talk earlier today, in the similarities between near-death experiences and other types of experiences that create similar states of consciousness. One area is ayahuasca, medicine used in South America called the vine of death or the vine of the soul, and what the similarities or differences are. And then most recently, the research I've been involved with, again, with Skip and two other friends, Steve Alsam, who's a chaplain at hospice, and Glenn Fox, who's a PhD in material sciences, looking at what are NDE phenomena, what is consciousness, and we're writing a book about dialogues about near-death experiences from different vantage points. We're also including a shamanic view. So there are 5 of us from very different philosophical or theoretical perspectives trying to look at consciousness. The areas I hope to move to in the future include looking more at after effects of NDEs. I think there's a lot of discussion, debate about NDEs and what they are, but I think equally important is how they affect us, and also the cross-cultural differences in NDEs, looking at different cultural aspects and how they influence the NDE phenomenon.
I'm Robert Mays, and well, Suzanne and I have been involved in Suzanne and I have been involved with near-death experience studies actually since Raymond Moody's book came out in '75, and more specifically since 2005, we have been trying to develop a theory of consciousness based on NDEs, and trying to make it a theory that is testable and can be, provide insights for how consciousness actually works. So that's our background.
And I'll invite Suzanne to talk first about her ideas about the future directions for NDE research.
There are 3 areas of exploration that I wish to offer as suggestions for future research in the field of near-death experiences. The first has to do with interview methods, both prospective and retrospective, for investigating the transcendental elements so predominant in accounts by people who have these extraordinary otherworldly experiences. Near-death experiences certainly recall their story vividly and passionately. However, the question remains, are there important details left out that, when brought to light, would further uncover the nature of the transcendental realms? Is there an inquiry method that could help NDEs draw up into consciousness significant elements of their out-of-body event that they had to leave behind when they, so to speak, drank the draught of forgetfulness during the return to ordinary sense-bound consciousness tied to their physical body? Researchers need to focus more broadly on the subjective first-person description of what NDEs report in order to draw out of them deeper details, not just of the episodic nature of the account, but also of the features, characteristics, attributes of who and what was encountered. More data points are needed to give a clearer picture of the different realms and different levels of beings that are encountered during this exceptional, life-altering, and entirely different kind of existence. Though NDEs say their experience is ineffable, researchers still need to strive more skillfully within the limits of human language to coax out of NDEs a more detailed portrayal of the transcendent experience. The second area where more concerted attention could be directed is in the field of neuroscience. More researchers are needed who are familiar with, keep up to date, and are conversant about the ever-increasing discoveries in science. The technology for brain imaging, for example, keeps improving at a remarkable pace, showing in ever-refined detail electrical impulses in neural circuits of the brain. In addition, scientists are viewing for the first time never before seen neural structures at micro levels. The current dominant scientific paradigm interprets these findings as evidence that consciousness is produced solely by the brain, reducing all subjective experience to purely mechanistic, materialistic processes. The good news is that the better the imaging technology, the more anomalies show up and other brain activity that cannot be explained by the current monopolistic scientific theory that relegates self-awareness to operations of a brain that functions like a machine and diminishes the human to a zombie-like creature. NDE researchers need to stay in touch with developments in neuroscience in order to intelligently point to other ways of interpreting what technology is showing. The phenomena found in the whole spectrum of death and dying provides more explanatory power when included with the technological discoveries of brain functions. The third area to develop has to do with investigating transcendent aspects of the near-death experience and shared death experience as objective realities. In other words, the transcendent can be studied, revealing its own unique laws, and at the same time congruous with physical reality. These laws are different from, but they are at the same time congruous with physical reality. Coming to terms with the mysteries of earthly existence starts with discovering how the physical world is a manifestation of the spiritual world. There is no matter without spirit. There is no spirit without matter. Therefore, what kind of beings are met in transcendent realms? And how do these spiritual beings differ from one another? Is there a geography of transcendent realms? And what is the specific and unique purpose of each? How are these beings related to nature? And what are they teaching about the paradoxes of earthly existence related to spirit and matter, the transient and eternal, birth and death, good and evil, joy and suffering, health and illness, oneness and individuality, and the mysteries of space and time, free will, evolution, karma, and reincarnation?
Thank you very much. And now Mitch Liester.
Well, let me begin by saying that I hope the future of NDE research involves a greater degree of collaboration between individuals in different disciplines. As a physician, thank you. Can I have an amen? Thank you. Thank you. As a physician, what I find is that doctors are very shut down to this topic, as some of you may be aware already. May not be a surprise. Physicians are not trained in NDEs. If they're trained at all, it's to be very skeptical and closed-minded about these experiences. And it's very difficult to find other physicians, and I'm glad there are a few here, who are open to the possibility and idea of investigating these experiences further. But I don't think the medical field is going to give us the answers we're looking for, at least not by itself. I think we need to include individuals from many different disciplines, from physics, from different fields, material science, spirituality, as many different disciplines as we can include, and also different cultures. There are many different aspects of the NDEs that are different in different cultures, and we don't yet have a real solid understanding of why that occurs. You know, why do Buddhists see Buddha sometimes, and Christians see Christians? Not necessarily, see Christ, but not necessarily. But there's not been a lot of study done to explain why there's this different imaging that occurs in different cultures. So I think if we can incorporate a bigger group of people both investigating near-death experiences and a larger group of people who've had experiences, we're going to gain a lot of understanding. As I mentioned earlier, I'm very interested in the after effects. I think there's a lot of debate about what causes NDEs. There's a gentleman I mentioned earlier in the talk who thinks it's the release of DMT in the pineal gland. Well, that's one view. But if someone else thinks there's a different view, that doesn't change the fact that people are affected by near-death experiences. And what are these changes? You can debate all day what causes them, but you can't debate, I don't believe, well, you can, but there's less debate about what are the effects and how do they profoundly affect people's lives. So I'd like to see more research into the after effects. As a physician and a psychiatrist, I still think there is possibly some value in brain imaging studies. I'm not certain of that. We tried a study a while back, Skip and I and a couple of other friends, looking at EEG changes in an individual who had some very intuitive abilities, a shaman, and we didn't see anything on the EEG that changed. Now, that doesn't mean there's nothing that happened, just means that didn't seem to show us the changes. So will a functional MRI or a PET scan show us the difference between someone who's had a NDE and someone who's not? We don't know. It may or may not, but I think we still would be ahead to try studies and see what we find, but not just limit ourselves to brain imaging scans and thinking that all the consciousness and all the changes occur in the brain. I think it's still valuable to look at similarities and differences between NDEs and related phenomenon, whether that be someone who goes to South America and drinks ayahuasca, whether it's someone who has a deathbed vision. These are related phenomena, but there are also differences, and I think in those differences we can learn a tremendous amount. So I think what we need to do, what I'm hoping we do, is recruit and stimulate the interest of more people to get involved in doing research. Everyone, I think, has ideas about where this could go and has ideas of different studies that could be performed. And I think if we're going to move forward, we're going to need to incorporate those ideas from many different disciplines and from many different people. Thank you.
So the three areas that I think need to be looked at and concentrated on, first of all, shared death experiences and other phenomena surrounding death, in addition to NDEs. In particular, shared death experiences, as I mentioned in my talk, are like NDEs, have a number of similar characteristics, and this is just a field that's just beginning. Actually, SDE research is at the stage, probably 1977, 78, that NDEs were at. A few years after the initial book was published, and only just now, at least as far as we're aware, SDE research is getting started, and so there should be the same kind of arc of development of the SDE theory or SDE data as NDEs have gone through. So there should be characterization of types of SDEs, the characteristic elements of SDEs, an SDE scale. If Bruce Grayson is still willing to do something like that, or some other researcher, and then following it, and of course there are going to be challenges which I'll get to in that type of research. But following basically the processes, the line of study that NDEs followed from 75 to the present. And it can be a more accelerated process. With regard to other phenomena around the time of death, as I mentioned in my talk again, terminal lucidity is a very important phenomenon that is just beginning. There's no book, again, that I'm aware of, but studies, a couple of studies have been, well, several studies have been done, and so it's just, the data is are just beginning to be developed about, incidents and characteristics and so on. And then there are, that's terminal lucidity, but then there are other phenomena that Peter and Elizabeth Fennick have done a good deal of research in, deathbed visions and physical phenomena, clock stopping and things falling when somebody dies. And so there's, those are all related, and I agree with Raymond Moody and Peter Fennick that basically all of these phenomena, including NDEs, SDEs, are all related to, form a bigger picture. And so that's I guess this first category is, what is that bigger picture of the process of death and dying, and what does that tell us about consciousness and the nature of reality. The second area is veridical perceptions, the apparent veridical perceptions that occur in NDEs, but now also in SDEs, and there may be veridical information coming from terminal lucidity. In fact, I'm pretty sure there is. In other words, there are these sources, of veridical information, veridical perceptions that occur, and they can be studied. And in particular, of course, everybody's aware, or hopefully they're aware. They are aware of the AWARE study. The AWARE study is the awareness during resuscitation. In other words, it's a study that Samparnia and colleagues all over the world are doing of cardiac arrest patients who have a cardiac arrest and then are resuscitated. And did they have a near-death experience? Was the out-of-body experience part of that? And if so, did they see anything? In particular, did they see anything that can be verified? And in particular, did they see a particular target that happened to be up near the ceiling where they probably went during their out-of-body experience? And what did they see of that target? Was it what was there, or was it what was it? And so that's the AWARE study. And that's being done in a number of hospitals in Canada, well, in Europe, England, and in the United States, and in Canada. And so there are some challenges with that, which I'll get to. And then with regard to veridical perceptions and veridical information, there's this book that has been published in Dutch, which the English translation is roughly what a dying brain can't do. And a dying brain can't see things. A dying brain can't have experiences. And yet, and in particular, a dying brain can't have veridical experiences, veridical perceptions. And so this is a collection of 78 cases where there was third-party verification of veridical perceptions. And it's really quite fascinating. It isn't just a collection of these cases, but some analysis too. And it's in Dutch, and which is great for the Netherlands and a few other places in the world, but doesn't help researchers who don't know Dutch. So we are trying to work to, hopefully with IANDS as the starting point to get funding for the translation and publication of this book in English. So that's the second challenge, or the second field, and I just want to veridical perceptions and veridical information is very important with respect to demonstrating the objective reality of these experiences, including veridical information that is gotten from the transcendent parts of the NDE and the SDE, and terminal lucidity is itself is somewhat transcendent. So there's, it is a kind of foundational piece for making the case that NDEs and SDEs and all of these other phenomena, interrelated phenomena, mutually corroborative phenomena, are real, objective phenomena and not hallucinations and products of the dying brain. So consciousness studies is the third part, the third area that ought to be looked at. And of course, that's where we are focusing. We're looking at neuroscience to develop a theory of consciousness, to understand consciousness better, and in particular the problem of interaction. If the mind is something that is separate from the physical body and can exist separate from the physical body, then that's a kind of dualistic view of the mind. And if that's the case, then it must interact in some way with the brain. And in whatever form the mind is, it's going to have to interact. And one hears these theories about consciousness is is like a radio, the brain is like a radio receiver and transmitter. Well, okay, then where are those waves? how do they work, and how are they generated in the brain, how are they received by the brain, and so on. And so that sort of analogy, theory by analogy really doesn't work very well, other than the first step. So that's the challenge there. So the three are shared death and other phenomena related to death, and veridical perceptions and consciousness studies.
So after all these years of researching NDEs, I still have some burning questions. And one of them is about how to get the message of near-death experiences to humanity at large. And one of the prevailing themes that comes out of especially pleasurable near-death experiences, which seem to be the vast majority of near-death experiences, is that human life has purpose. And the purpose seems to be loving and learning. Loving, advancing our capacity to experience and express compassion and caring for each other, and learning the acquisition of knowledge. And so in order for that message to reach humanity, near-death experiences themselves have to have more, be more widely legitimized. And so I'm interested in research that legitimizes NDEs. And my very first published article was a hospital study of veridical perception. Veridical perception is where, based on the condition and position of the near-death experiencer's body, they shouldn't be able to perceive particular things that they did perceive during the near-death experience, and then it's later corroborated as being accurate. And it's especially evidential when what they perceived contradicted their expectations, and even contradicted their worldview of what's even possible. So like Robert, I'm very interested in Sam Parnia's study. I've been involved in 2 or 3 studies of this kind. So far, there have been 5 studies completed so far, and none of them have yielded even a single case where we've captured a patient who was, out of their body and seeing the visual target that we had placed. And so we're not sure exactly what's going wrong there. We suspect that it may have, at least in part, something to do with the nature of the visual targets that we're using, even though my preliminary research indicated that in the out-of-body state, the nature of visual perception is very much like visual perception in the physical body. In other words, blue looks like blue, and people are recognizable and objects are recognizable. About 50% of people said that they could read. The NDEs also report that what they focus on has more to do with things that are of emotional and spiritual significance than like a square of blue in a corner with a triangle and a number on it. Like, who cares to look at that? So we're really challenged to find ways to assess this phenomenon. One of the more ideal features of Sam Parnia's current study is that it's in a lot of hospitals, and we're hoping that by casting a wide net, we're going to capture something. But one of the weaknesses is that the visual targets are visible to anybody who gets up on a ladder. And so there's always the question, if we do capture one, what did the person somehow come by that information in some alternate way than it was their consciousness seeing that visual target. So it's really a challenging area, and one I continue to feel a lot of passion about. Another thing that would help legitimize NDEs is to more firmly, I guess, establish their universal quality. And Jeff Long of the Near-Death Experience Research Foundation, which is an online foundation where people from all over the world have registered their near-death experiences, and he has analyzed the experiences in terms of their similarity across cultures, and found that the themes that we have known for a long time occur in Western near-death experiences also seem to occur in Eastern ones. But we need a lot more work in that area, as Mitch alluded to as well. And in particular, I can say that because my students, my doctoral students and colleagues and I have created the index of refereed publications on near-death experiences. So any article that's ever been published on NDEs in a refereed journal, a scholarly journal, has been analyzed for content, and this is available at the IANDS website for people who are at a pretty low level of membership. And a researcher can look up some topic like suicide and near-death experiences, and bloop, there's a list of all the articles that have ever been published that address that phenomenon. From that, we know that we have virtually no studies from South America or Africa. So we've got two huge continents that we don't have a lot of data from yet. And so there's a lot to be done cross-culturally. Another thing that would legitimize near-death experiences is to be able to follow up on the electromagnetic after effects, the kind of research that Mitch has been involved in. One of my doctoral students, now Dr. Farnoosh-Nuri, did her dissertation on this topic, and she looked at people who had a close brush with death with a near-death experience, a close brush with death without a near-death experience, and to their memory had never been close to death. So there were these three groups of people, and she gave them all this questionnaire about their experiences of electrical things going haywire in their presence. And what she found was that the people, if you look at just the people who've never been close to death, and they reported like this level, the people who'd come close to death without a near-death experience had reported slightly more. And the people who'd come close to death with a near-death experience were like this. So there was a significant difference. And so they definitely report the phenomenon more. The next step, or a next step, not the next step, would be a study. I have this, in fact, I'm actually going to ask all the panel members to, I'm popping this question. I didn't prepare you for this, but if you could do one study, like what's your next study or your ideal study that you'd really love to do? Mine is to find a few near-death experiencers who have a lot of this electromagnetic problem, and take them one by one into a lab, stick them in a Faraday cage, which keeps out interference of any other electrical stuff, and somehow assess their electrical output as they listen to a scripted guided imagery that takes them, let me sidestep for a second. One of the things that Farnoosh found was that the electromagnetic effects were increased when people were emotionally aroused. So it didn't matter whether they were really mad or whether they were really sad or really afraid. That's when the light bulbs burst and cell phones went out and computers crashed and those sorts of things. So this guided imagery thing would take them into recalling and as completely as possible a recent situation in which they felt really angry, and then returning to a baseline of peace, like going back to a peaceful place, and then a situation where they were really sad, and being able to assess their electrical output. The question is, what exactly do we assess? That's kind of where we're stuck in that process of putting this study together. My second burning question is about how near-death experiencers can be treated better. I mentioned this study at a presentation yesterday about near-death experiencers' experiences of disclosing their NDEs to healthcare providers. And we found that, first of all, we had 88 near-death experiencers reporting on 188 of their most noteworthy experiences and of disclosure. And so that was all, we just said which ones stand out in your mind the most. And let me take a poll in the audience. How many of you, if you imagine the percentage of experiences of disclosure that people reported were negative versus those that were neutral or positive, how many think that there would be more negative ones reported by near-death experiencers? Okay. How many think it would be kind of close to half and half, maybe half negative, half positive? And how many think more positive experiences? Yeah, that's interesting because you all are almost equally divided, but actually what we found was that 4/5 of the experiences were neutral to positive, and only, I'm using that word in quotation marks, 1/5 were negative, emotionally distressing, and psychologically damaging. So the Hippocratic Oath, which is part of every healthcare provider's ethics in one form or another, is the first aspect of it is to do no harm. And we found that there was no difference between type of healthcare providers. So whether it was a medical, mental health, social, like in social workers, or spiritual, religious, like chaplains, ministers, that sort of thing, no difference. In other words, everybody was doing a good job, and there were a group that was, or a portion of each group that was doing a bad job of responding to near-death experiencers' disclosures of their experience. We also found that the sooner a person talked about or disclosed their NDE, the more negative their experience of disclosure. And that kind of makes sense. Sometimes early on, the person doesn't discern very well who is really safe to disclose to, so they'll kind of blah, and then they have a bad reaction. And also, it's possible that over time, near-death experiencers become more coherent in just their description of what they experienced, and so that may engender more positive reaction. Anyway, that's the kind of, it just all points to the need for education of healthcare providers across the board. And so in order to, this leads then to another aspect, which is in order to research what are the best ways to educate people, we have to have instruments that assess things like the quality of a disclosure experience. And so for this study that I was just describing, we developed what we call the NEEDS, N-E-E-D-S. It's the near-death experiences of disclosure scale, the NEEDS. And and it's psychometrically very strong, so we now have a way to really do studies about disclosure experiences. We've had the near-death experience scale since the early 1980s from Bruce Grayson, which assesses the presence and sort of like depth or complexity of a near-death experience. So that's about the experience itself, and that's used widely in NDE research. Interestingly, as important as after effects are to NDEers, we still have no psychometrically strong instrument to assess after effects. The closest thing is Ring and Grayson's Life Changes Inventory Revised, but in 3 recent studies, including our NEEDS study with my doctoral candidate graduate assistant Lee Kinsey, the LCIR has a lot of psychometric problems. So that's a really fundamental thing that we need to be developed in the field. my doctoral student, Laura Pace, now Dr. Laura Pace, developed the CANDES, K-A-N-D-E-S, Knowledge and Attitudes About Near-Death Experience Scale. And there early on, Nina Thornburg developed an instrument, and it was better than nothing, but it was really, she aimed it at nurses, and it had certain idiosyncrasies and things that didn't make it widely usable. So the CANDES is, Laura followed all the best practices in instrument development, and we now have a way to assess health professionals' knowledge and attitudes. So we can look at different educational interventions and how they affect knowledge and attitudes and how they affect health professionals' ability to respond helpfully when near-death experiencers disclose their experiences. My last burning question is about the nature of the mind and brain. The question really is, who are we? You know, and what is the nature of consciousness and mind and brain and all of that that Suzanne and Robert are addressing much more intensely than I am. But that leads back to veridical perception and cross-cultural. It's all kind of mixed up together. So, okay. So I'm interested, now that you've had time to think about it, if you could do, and we still have about 45 minutes. So if you could do one study right now, what would you do? And you don't feel like you have to respond to this, but if you have an answer and it's different than anything you've said before, jump in.
I'm going to defer to Robert.
Okay. Yeah.
Well, we would like to have an experiment that looks at the energetic field of a person, and there are a number of different sets of people that have an energetic field that is more than the usual person, and they include a person who has a phantom limb, a person who is an energetic healer, and a person who has had an NDE. And in any case, to see if there's some way that we can measure the interaction with that energetic field and in vitro neurons, where you can actually measure, you know, exactly what's going on in this one particular neuron and see if there is some sort of interaction. As I said earlier, we have done experiments where that interaction is, we have measured something where there are perceptions and experiences when there is that sort of interaction with the person's head, which is presumably affecting their brain. But it would be good if we could narrow it down and get a model of the interaction of the energetic field with a single neuron, and then we could check whether that neuron, where is the interaction happening, and hopefully that would help establish some sort of model for the interface of the mind to the brain. So that's the.
Okay. And Mitch? Yeah.
One of the challenges with the research from a medical standpoint is that NDEs don't fit the model of traditional medical research. It's hard to do double-blind placebo-controlled studies with NDEs. It's kind of obvious if the person's died or not, so there's no placebo. You can't really induce NDEs. It's not considered ethical. IRBs don't smile too much about those. So we have to come up with some new paradigms. I still think one of the most fascinating areas to research is the electromagnetic changes that many people report, but it's a very difficult study to do. Dr. Skip Morgan and we've spent many days talking about this. How do you measure the electromagnetic spectrum? Which frequency range do you even select, and how do you measure it? And how do you sort that out from the interference from other electromagnetic changes in the room? As Jan mentioned earlier, you may use a Faraday cage, but these are difficult studies to design in the first place. I still think it's worth doing, but I think it's going to take a lot of collaboration and effort. But I think these after effects still have the potential to teach us a tremendous amount about near-death experiences, their effects, and consciousness as well.
Great. Okay. So, and I I just wanted to comment too that I really agree with Mitch that the electromagnetic is really going to call for collaboration with people from other fields, and your studies as well. You know, the having the medical neuroscientific expertise. So so it can be a challenge to find people. I'll just tell you a little anecdote from this was 20 years ago, but so I don't know if things have loosened up a little bit since then, but a person in my part of the world, the Dallas-Fort Worth area, approached me to do a study in which near-death experiencers who had experienced the omniscient aspect of the experience, where they were in a place where they had a sense of access to all knowledge ever, came to, we actually did this study. They came to UNT, my University of North Texas, and we hired a hypnotist and helped them re-experience their near-death experience, looking for information about a particular disease, a very rare neurological disease. And one of our near-death experiencer participants generated information that after the study was over and I was reporting back to this benefactor what had come out of the hypnotic sessions, he said that person had delivered information that was what was so far known about this disorder, that there were 2 chromosomes involved in it, and that it was passed by the mother, it was inherited from the mother, and one other feature that I can't remember. So after the study was over, the benefactor and this near-death experiencer together, because what the near-death experiencer said was, when I was getting all this stuff, I was seeing things that I didn't really entirely understand. And if I could just consult with somebody who knows more about, you know, this person was like a stained glass artist. He didn't know anything about, you know, chromosomes and genes and that sort of thing. But he said, if I could describe what I'm seeing to somebody who knows more about this, I might really be able to generate more information. So they embarked on a process of trying to find somebody who would work with them. And do you know that they could not find anyone? People who not only wouldn't work with them in an official capacity, but that they offered, you know, what if we just got together on the side on a Saturday, you know, just as a little personal project? And all of the biological people were just terrified of being associated with this kind of flaky process, you know, that they would lose their National Science Foundation funding, you know, if the word got out that they were. So so there are some prejudices, or at least there were at that time, and I think probably still are, prejudices that make collaboration with people from other fields still a little bit challenging. But this is why we're in the association, we're excited to have as many medical people and even physicists and so forth involved in the conferences. So, anything else you want to say?
Yes.
Go ahead, Mitch.
I have actually some questions for you before you start asking us questions. The more we talk about this, the more research we do with the NDEs, the more questions it raises in my mind. So if any of you have answers, I would love to hear them. These are just to ponder. One is, how do we get more people involved in NDE research? One of the challenges has been there's not enough research going on in my mind. There needs to be more research. We need more intelligent, dedicated, motivated people to investigate this, to look at it as a serious field of scientific inquiry. So how do we get more people involved? Second, as a physician, how do we get more physicians involved in this field of near-death experiences? I've found physicians to be probably the least open group of individuals to even discuss NDEs or to consider that they exist. If you have suggestions on what we can do for physicians, I'd love to hear them. I've run into many dead ends trying to talk to physicians at medical groups at hospitals or professional societies. It just doesn't go over well. That's been my reaction too. It's just not working. So if you have suggestions, I'd love to hear them. How do we educate healthcare professionals earlier in their careers? I think once they get into their careers, they often become very closed-minded. How can we crack into the medical field, the nursing fields at an earlier level? And Jan, you may have some ideas. How do we broaden the scope of research? There have been some wonderful studies performed about NDEs, but I'm sure there's much more that we could investigate, maybe things we haven't even thought of yet. Maybe you all have ideas about things that we could look at with NDEs that would be useful to broaden the scope of research. And then finally, and this is something that Robert and Suzanne are already doing, is how do we study consciousness? I mean, it's hard enough to define, let alone study, but maybe there are other ways that we can explore and study consciousness and do research that would lead us to a better understanding of NDEs. So those are some of the questions I would propose to you all.
Yeah. Okay. So hold your thoughts on that, and we just want to talk briefly about what we see as challenges, and then we're interested in your answers to Mitch's questions or anything else that you want to pose for us.
Okay.
Do you want to talk about
Suzanne.
Well, the first challenge that I would talk about is concerning the interview methods, and that has to do with asking more probing questions and then compare accounts. The places that the NDEers find themselves are transported are uncharted territories. The transcendent realms are really a new frontier of human consciousness that we've only begun to explore, to identify and to form an intimate relationship with. The accounts of near-death experiences and shared death experiences that we already know about are by no means the complete recollection of everything in these experiences, and the NDEers readily admit this. There are fragments and clues in these accounts that can be followed up with more penetrating questions. For example, Eben Alexander speaks of ascending realms he passed through in his NDE, depicting them as the earthworm view, the gateway, and the core. Could this be indicative of actual transformative stages one goes through in transcendent realms? And how is this orderly change of consciousness showing up in other NDEs, described differently given other designations? The second area that poses challenges is involving neuroscience. So, how to find colleagues who are actively working, studying, teaching in this field. Team up with people who have the technology of how neurons work, for instance, of seeing how the ion channels and dendrites of neurons operate to discover major interface of brain and mind. That's just one example. Collaborate with researchers in this field who are working from the perspective of spiritual science in order to develop a more comprehensive and compelling explanation of the dual nature of spirit and matter. And the third area that I talked about involving the transcendent realms as objective realities, the challenge there is change people's thinking about what is reality and articulate a new paradigm that represents a truer image of the human being and a clearer picture of transcendent realms. Apply the same rigorous method of thinking used for exoteric science for discovering the laws of the outer world, the outer physical world, to esoteric science for discovering the laws of transcendental supersensory existence. Take up the indications carried by the spiritual stream of Western esotericism as clues for how to proceed to investigate the ultra-real worlds the NDEers say they have sojourned to.
Thank you. And Mitch, did you want to? Yeah, thanks. Anything else you want to say about challenges?
Just something briefly. I think one of the things as a field, since this is a relatively new field, there's been a lot of focus on trying to legitimize the field, legitimize near-death experiences, legitimize research. And in doing so, one of the things we've done, I think, and justifiably so, is to look at the similarities between experiences cross-culturally, between different types of causes of death. And I think that has been useful in terms of recognizing that there are a lot of similarities. But what it's also done, I think, is left some people out of the game. Some people who have different types of near-death experiences, maybe they don't go through a tunnel, maybe they don't meet a being of light, maybe it's a frightening near-death experience, may sometimes feel that they have not even had a near-death experience or not recognized they've had one. So I think one of the challenges that we face is to not only legitimize the field of research we're doing, but to widen it and broaden it to include more people. And I think we're going to learn as much from the differences in people's experiences as we do from the similarities.
Well, with regard to shared death experiences and other experiences around the time of death, obviously there needs to be more data. And there needs to be, basically to try to avoid what happened with the study of near-death experiences, where there were a whole bunch of researchers in the late 70s and early 80s, and actually even into the 90s, where there was no standardization or agreement about types of NDEs and elements of NDEs, and so there was a whole lot of data collected that can't be compared, can't be combined. And when you do attempt to combine it, you sometimes run into difficulties. This recent paper that Stephen Loris and in Belgium did about comparing non-life-threatening NDEs and NDEs that occurred during coma, found that there was no difference. Well, that directly contradicts a study done in 1991, I believe it was, that said the closer you are to death, the more likely you're going to have more features, and it's going to be deeper experience. And that's a direct contradiction. Well, I went back to that paper, that study, and found that basically there is a flaw to that study, although I would like the authors to respond. But it seems like there's a flaw that they were taking data from different researchers, going back over 3 different studies and finding, and combining them. And the problem, it was not a very large set of data, and the combination, the combining might have been problematic. I think it was. And so that's exactly the problem I'm talking about. We have been taking this conclusion from this 1991 study that said, the deeper the NDE, the deeper meaning the more features and so on, the more intense, the closer to death that you have come, the more features and the more intense the NDE will be. Well, that's not what was found in the Belgium study. So I think the problem is that there was no standardization of analyzing NDEs. Well, I'd like to avoid that with SDEs and other phenomena. And of course, with veridical perceptions, the AWARE study has a tremendous challenge. And the challenge is that you need thousands of cases of cardiac arrest to get one OBE where something is seen even. And so it's like, because if you look at how many NDEs occur, how many people survive a cardiac arrest, how many people then have an NDE, and of those, how many have an OBE, and and can you get them in time, and did they see anything, and can you verify that, and each time the section, the amount, the yield, let's say, of the cases gets smaller and smaller, and it will be, I calculated it once, like 7,500 cases of cardiac arrest to get one. I could be wrong, but it's a large number in the thousands. And so that's the big challenge there. And then, of course, the two cases that they've had that I understand have had, where there was an OBE and something was seen, well, they hadn't installed the targets because they occurred in places in the hospital where they were not likely to have cardiac arrest, and so why put a target there? Well, they were wrong about that. Anyway, that's a huge challenge. So veridical perceptions is hugely difficult, and of course part of the problem is funding for that research. I think much of it is pro bono kind of thing, you know, and so busy scientists, busy doctors don't have time for a huge number of interviews with cardiac arrest patients. And of course, I think Suzanne covered the challenges with consciousness studies, particularly finding collaborators.
Great. And I just want to echo Robert's comment about funding. It's been, I think, something unspoken so far on the panel, but it's really a very huge fundamental problem, is that, you know, I, for one, have ideas for studies more than I can do in this lifetime, but finding the time and the money to do them is the challenge, and particularly them. If there were the money, there would be the time. But this is not an area that's readily funded. So time for us to hear from you. Mitch, yes, come up to the microphone. Thanks. And we're anxious to hear what you have to say. And if you're directing your question to a specific person, please go ahead and do that, or just to the whole panel, let us know who you would like to respond.
Well, I was responding to Mitch. My name is Elijah, and you're asking about how do we teach medical professionals from the very beginning, and I look at this as a paradigm change, and we're scientists. We're trying to change science from within. You know, playing by their rules on their home field. And so I think the answer is children's books. I mean, I think we need to change things from the very, very basis of how society looks at humans and at the continuation of consciousness. So.
This is directed at all of you. I've done a number of studies as a research participant, including with Robert and Suzanne. And one thing that really surprises me over and over again is that there are NDE researchers, and then there are parapsychologists and others who kind of work in areas that are connected to consciousness, but not necessarily NDEs, and they don't seem to know anything about each other. And it's very, very frustrating to work with parapsychologists who are familiar with, you know, various psi experiences, but have no clue that these are often considered the after effects of NDEs. And I had a researcher say to me, well, you know, it's all nice that you think that these experiences are related to your NDE, but there's really no research to back that up. And I know Jan is freaking when I say that. and I mean, the first thing I did was find an old article from Theta that was written by Bruce Grayson that showed that, yes, psi experiences, psychokinesis, and various other things like that are in fact related to the after effects of NDEs. So is there any plan on doing work with, say, people with associated with the Parapsychological Association or the Society of Scientific Exploration in terms of getting that kind of a cross-pollination of expertise, because there really should be something going on there.
Well, I don't see anybody grabbing the microphone, so I guess not. But you know, it's a great, Shirley, it's a great idea for IANDS to consider holding some kind of cross-pollination type of conference, or meeting of some kind. So I'm just making a note of it. I think it's a great idea.
Well, Suzanne and I are fortunate to live in the same city or near the same city that the IANDS office is and the Rhine Center is. And actually they're in the same building. And so we regularly attend their meetings. They have research meetings, informal discussion meetings, and we have found exactly that Psi researchers do not know very much about NDEs, and so our task is to teach them about what we know about NDEs, and they are very interested in learning that, and they have to change their thinking. And likewise, we learn through, just discussing and hearing what their work is about parapsychology research. And so the two of us are doing somewhat of that, and it is very mutually beneficial exchanges. So it is happening, at least among some of us, and I would encourage other NDE researchers to reach out to parapsychologists, and it would be good to have a conference that did both, addressed both.
Thank you. And I'd also like to say, if you have a watch for me to break, I'd break it.
Thank you.
A challenge on finding new people to involve with the research. In Reverend Price's book, Revealing Heaven, he has the account of his best friend calling him and saying, I was in an accident, and I had this wonderful experience, and Reverend Price has to leave, and he leaves town for a couple of weeks, and when he comes back, his friend has no memory because they had administered a drug to prevent PTSD from the trauma. How widespread is the use of that drug? Good purpose for the drug, being a veteran, but that could have a major impact on finding participants in the future. Anybody remember the name of it?
It might be Versed.
That's it.
Yeah, and they do. You can choose not to have it, and it really doesn't make that much of a difference in terms of your experience. At least my experience was fine without it, and it does affect the memory. And people need to realize, they don't want to have the memory of they would like their memory destroyed, or wiped out, and that's their choice. But there is this problem that there's data that are being lost, cases that we will never know anything about. Yeah.
But if they want it, could that be recalled through a regression therapy?
Oh yeah, that's a good point. Yeah.
And as far as the ones that might still remember it, a good density where you might have them is any veterans care facility. If we can find a way to penetrate that protective wall they put around them, everybody in there has had a major traumatic event, but we just can't get access to them.
Well, I will comment on that, Linda. Diane came to Fort Carson Evans Hospital in Colorado Springs to give a talk about near-death experiences to to the medical staff in Colorado Springs, a large Army hospital, and there were probably 50 to 100 medical staff in attendance. She asked them, how many people have had NDEs among you all, and I think 2 or 3 people raised their hand. After the talk, several more came up and talked about their experiences, but they were not comfortable acknowledging or admitting they'd had an NDE in front of their peers because it was too risky. So the challenge, I think, in the military community is, you're right, there are a lot of people who have had the experiences, but do they feel safe enough to talk about them? In fact, when we went and suggested to one of the psychiatrists I know there that they go on the IANDS website, the Army had blocked the IANDS website as an unsafe website, so that the doctors there couldn't even access the IANDS website, the military base.
Well, I'll just follow up on that my former student, now Dr. Tracy Goza, did her doctoral dissertation on military people's near-death experiences. It just came out in the journal Military Medicine. And one of the things that she found was that the depth of their NDEs seemed not quite as deep as NDEs in general, but we hypothesized what Mitch just said, that even in those anonymous circumstances where people are answering something online anonymously, they still may have felt vulnerable and played down the intensity of their experiences. And so it's interesting for me to hear about your experience there. So definitely investigating military NDEs is a challenge. Thank you.
Thank you.
Roberta.
I'm taller. I had some comments similar to, is it Cheryl? To Cheryle's about, I think that we have studies in different areas that could be informative with one another. Specifically, I'm associated with the Monroe Institute, and when you're talking about veridical perception studies, they have reams of information on remote viewing, and they teach courses in remote viewing. I've remote viewed, so it's pretty easy to teach somebody. And the out-of-body experiences there. I think that, if you look a little bit at the two different situations, at the Monroe Institute, people are trying to see a target. They're perfectly calm, they're in safe circumstances, and that is their intention, and that's pretty successful. I mean, pretty high rates of success. Whereas in a near-death experience, the person is popping out of their body in a traumatic situation, and they're not thinking about, is there something on top of the cabinet? So I think that we can infer, though, that there are similar experiences taking place, just under different circumstances. And we do have people in IANDS who are involved in both of those organizations. And I think it could be very useful to bring the information from both sources together.
Yeah, great. Thank you. Great idea. Hi.
Hi. Well,
You may want to lower. There you go.
yeah, there. Okay. I also did some classes at the JFK University in parapsychology, and it did seem, this was a number of years ago, but it didn't seem that they were interfacing at all with NDEs and like that, so it would be good to do that. I was just wondering if it might do some good just to make a plea on the internet for funding for requests. I mean, even if you get $5 per donation, there could be somebody who's reading that who says, I think I'll donate $50,000 to that. There could be somebody who donates $5 or $10 or, anything. But people are interested enough in the subject that I think you could get, a whole thing just by asking on the internet from
Thank
a lot
you.
of people.
So
Yeah.
using crowdfunding. I'll just insert that Roberta, who asked the question right before you, she and I are talking about planning to develop a video about suicide prevention from NDEs. There's a unique perspective on that from NDEs, and we were just at dinner last night talking about crowdfunding the production of that video. So
Wow.
yeah,
that
so
sounds
it's
good.
we're
Yeah. And the other
on the same
idea I
lines.
had about the teaching doctors, well, as the other person said, teaching young doctors would be great. But maybe if each person, I don't know how many doctors there are and scientists there are who believe in these things or are willing to allow them. If you did a program like in the movie Precious, where each one teach one, if you could vow to sort of teach a little bit of open-mindedness, like each one of you once a year, contact somebody that might be a little open and go to that person and, tell them about some things that it might work.
Thank you.
So, yeah.
Thank you.
Were you going to comment?
Yeah,
on that?
I'd like to just say that we are going to probably use crowdsourcing for funding the translation of this book from Dutch to English.
Great.
Yeah.
Wonderful.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Dan.
I just thought I'd mention just in the last year or two, they started this either National Institute of Health or National Institute of Medicine called they're studying the brain now, and they have an acronym that starts with the word brain. So maybe you could fit it in under brain studies. The other is, of course, most of these are materialistic studies of the brain, but another was the Allen Brain Institute in Seattle. He's one of the co-founders of Microsoft, and I don't know, he has billions that he's putting in into of course, you don't, that's not all in 1 year, you know, you put in $1 billion, but you probably only have like 50 million a year or something like that, but that's still quite a bit. The other is that I still remember the year because it was when we had our NDE conference in Houston there on the thing that the people from the Fetzer Institute came, but I guess they decided it never fell through with anything.
That's right. Yeah, the Fetzer Institute hosted leading NDE researchers, about 10 or 12 of us, to come for a long weekend and brainstorm about future directions of research. And about a year and a half later, the Institute decided to take a philosophical turn and focus on different things, so that never really materialized beyond a couple of small projects.
I'm not going to go over my whole list, but a couple of ideas and comments to make. First one immediately addresses what the gentleman to my left was talking about. We must have holistic paradigms to do this kind of research. You can't take a reductionist, materialistic paradigm and apply it to something that's holistic. And there's also a continuum. Like Joe Green was interestingly mentioning today, you have NDEs, you have lucid dreams, you have shamanic ecstasies. There seems to be a whole continuum in the experience of human consciousness. So a couple of studies that I thought might be interesting, also talking about collaborations. The Rhine Institute right next to IANDS, it seems to be natural. Thomas Mellon's doing research with Bruce Lipton now, mapping genetic diseases. It's very interesting collaboration. Something that Mitch comes right out of his talk today. How about NDEers and their ayahuasca experiences, those experiencing ayahuasca, and then those relationships and what we can look at there. The other one, and this is the last one, I won't go over the rest, is it seems that some NDEers come out with whole healing systems that have been taught to them. And some of them not related to anything previously known, to look at efficacy. You don't necessarily have to go into the details of methodology, just look at efficacy in those systems, and that's one.
Yeah, great.
Thank you.
I have read of people being disinherited because they badmouthed their NDEer in a hospital waiting room in front of their other relatives, and he heard them and came back to life and went to his property lawyer and wrote out a new will. I was also told in 1993 of a woman who had a veridical NDE. It was mind-blowing, astonishing, but it was never investigated, it was never documented. With this in mind, I believe that humanity requires an IANDS Bureau of Investigation. And to accomplish that, I have decided to contribute money from my last will and testament to IANDS, so that you can put some of that into operation. But bear in mind that I don't have a monopoly on that concept. Anybody in this room or elsewhere, if you love IANDS, your love can find its way into your last will and testament, if that's what you want. So don't forget about it. Give it some thought.
Thank you very much.
You're welcome very much.
Hello, my name is Kienda, and I think I will address Suzanne's beautiful overarching view of things. I think that one of the, since we're discussing both science and materiality and the transcendent supersensible worlds, we need to find a language, we need to find a way to bridge that. And there may be a way through vibratory ranges, vibratory dimensions, as it were, so that when, and that that way, that would bring the science in that could be calculated and measured. And I mean, because we know hearing goes beyond what we can hear, we know that colors are that we cannot perceive. There are other aspects that are beyond what we normally can observe and perceive. So, but those are actually those landscapes, because that's what they also are, they have other languages, such as the various religions, such as Dante's work, such as the Huna work. There are many, the Tibetan Buddhism and the esoteric Western traditions. These are all have been described. It's just in such diverse ways that we haven't found the language that we can all speak. And if that scientific aspect of it, say the vibration, or there must be another parameter that would be applicable to these different vibratory levels and these different dimensions, we could know then what we are talking about. That's something I personally have been working on. My master's degree in thanatology, the journey of the soul between death and rebirth. I brought in from the Western esoteric traditions and from the Tibetan points of view as well, and realized that one needs a large conceptual matrix in which all this diverse information can find a relational aspect. And actually, I was at one point telling people that I was recruiting for people who would work on this with me. So if anybody of you is doing that, I'll sign up. Thank you.
Thank you. And I'll just comment that even the challenge of using, thank you, a donation right now to the IANDS Research Fund, yeah. Even finding common language is a challenge even among researchers. It is. So thank you.
Hi, I'm Robin, and I'm near-death experience 3 times. And I understand, Mitch, you said you want more medical doctors to know about near-death experience. Is that right? Yes. I believe that's great that you want to do that. I believe I have something unique perspective to share with the medical community about deaf person with near-death experience. Because a lot of people get confused when they find out you're deaf. Oh, so you're dead. I think, no. One letter changed the whole meaning between dead and F. So I've been on spirit on both sides. So I believe I could be able to be a valuable tool to IANDS through my book, which I will talk more about it later. And another thing is, Suzanne, you say something about culture with different people near death experience. Do you mean people who speak Spanish or Italian? Is that what you mean by that? When you say different culture?
I'm not sure I understand your question.
Can you say something about that?
The reason, like for example, the medical doctor and research they did on near-death experience with hearing people. What about deaf people with near-death experience? And I can't find that kind of information because it's hard for me to explain, to share my story, because a lot of terminology is over my head. Like, for example, shared death spirit. I just learned it this year. And I had shared death spirit with my mother in 1988, and I'm finding out this year. And I think to myself, I can't be the only one that don't know the terminology. I'm sure there are some people in the audience. And I think to myself, would it be nice if you have like a vocabulary dictionary of all the terminology in a basic level, not intellectual level, you know, maybe like high school level or whatever. So when they understand, then people know how to express themselves better. And I'm sure people will come out of the woodwork. And that have helped me to write a book myself too. And I plan to have my book out late next year, and I want to help IANDS to raise money for that. But it's hard, because how we can bridge the gap between sign language, American Sign Language, and English. They're not the same language.
Right. Okay.
Yeah, so
Thank you. Do you want to use
the one comment I could make is we have these phrases, shared death experience, in a way that's a catch-all, it's a label. And we get hung up on the terminology, whereas if we focused in on the descriptive, everybody can speak to their experience in their own words, and the meaning will be there. I don't think we need to have, it's good to have a common agreement on what something is, but we do have a crossover with languages. We have many languages, but we can still understand each other. There's a translation that can happen, and I think we each can have our own translation of our experience. It doesn't have to, you don't have to memorize what is a shared death experience. Just in the description of what you had gone through is enough. Or can be enough, let's put it that way.
Yeah.
You want me to say something?
Well, I'm torn because there are two people behind you, and we have 2 minutes left. And I'd like to have them have an opportunity to say what they want to say as well. So maybe we can talk further after the panel.
Sure.
Yeah, okay, thank you, Robin.
All right.
Oh, one person, okay.
Hi.
And you have, okay, you're not just there telling me 2 minutes, okay, yeah. Go ahead.
Hi, well, I have a question about Dr. Eben Alexander, and he came out, he shared his experience, and then I think it was in last summer, a prominent skeptic, he published an article in the Esquire, and it had huge attraction, and apparently it became extremely popular and almost accepted as complete truth. And even though, as I know, Robert Mays, he published a rebuttal, and so it's kind of an indicator of what's happening out there. If we have all these half-truths or outright lies accepted as truths in a public forum, and it's it's kind of shocking almost.
Right. Yeah, it's a challenge, but it really means that we have to come back with saying, this is what the data say. These are the realities, and so the skeptical point of view is flawed, and that's about all that we can do. But we need to do it, and so we try to do that when particularly when there's a strong challenge like that. Yeah.
And I just really want to applaud you and Suzanne undertaking that job, because it was. It would have been very easy to just sort of fold in the face of that critique, essentially, from Esquire, and I think you all did a masterful job of really deconstructing and showing the flaws. So it was really well done, and that is available at the IANDS website.
Right.
Okay, so I'll be the last person. It kind of came to me whenever I heard Mitch's question, but now listening to everybody, I like to keep it simple. So there's two things. Collaboration and language is what I've been hearing. So I want to keep it real simple. Language that we can use like death. People at MD Anderson and people at University of Texas say, that nurse, that her life is all about death. Okay, well that would be me. And Dr. So-and-so asked me to be on a palliative care program with him et al. And oh yeah, that's that death nurse. And then all of a sudden I could send that live streaming stuff about this conference, and they couldn't come, but oh my goodness. They're going to start talking about that aspect. Isn't that interesting? And then also I'm the Queen Mother Superior in Texas for the LNEC, which is End of Life Nursing Education. And that's all over the world. And so now the director of that program is going to join us next year in San Antonio, and Diane is going to be a guest at LNEC soon. You see where I'm going with this? So it's all that nursing stuff I'm mentioning. However, the doctor in San Antonio is the one who has this. He's the leader of the palliative care programming, but that's all about death. So that's my point is, let's collaborate, let's be at the table together, and anytime we can walk through the door of death, let's bring all we can, whether it be about education. And lastly, Jan will remember this, when we had the program at the University of Texas, MD Anderson Cancer Center, one of the physicians there in the palliative care program told all of his students and residents they had to go to part of the IANDS program and follow up with some of our tapes and so on. So in their programming, that was required of them. And I can tell you, the director of all nurses at MD Anderson, and there's about 2,500 nurses there, she just let me know, which I'm the Mother Superior of LNEC programming, still at MD Anderson. I used to have maybe 5, 10 people. She has required all nursing residents to have the LNEC program. That means I now have 50 people, 50 nurses a month in this. We get to talk about death, and guess what else? Near-death experiences in death. So I just say, let's talk about death. Amen.
Thank you. Thank you. Yes, go ahead.
In April, I had the privilege of addressing the medical community at Deaconess Hospital in Evanston, Indiana. And it was the most, they have an annual symposium, and Eben Alexander was the other speaker. So because of his presence, it was the most widely attended talk or symposium that they've had. And I gave basically a shorter version of what I presented today at that symposium. So that was, you know, it's getting out there, or we're able to get it out there. Oh yeah, and the CEO of the hospital asked for the not just the video, the training, the NDE training video, the medical training video, but also the whole package. So we made a donation of that package to the hospital.
So we're all looking for opportunities to advance NDE education where we can. So, well, I want to thank all the panel members and the audience for a really interesting exchange, and just hope that you have a really good experience the rest of the conference. So thank you. You're welcome.